Hello everybody and welcome to a video here on the Constructed Criticism YouTube channel. I'm Spencer, and today I'm excited to do another deck tech for you. I did a poll on Twitter, so these deck techs will now be going on the Constructed Criticism Podcast Network feed. That's the network feed with all of the podcasts on the network, and you'll be able to hear these deck techs every week on there. With that being said, I just want to give a special shout out to all of those kind comments in my last video, and a really special shout out to the guy that told me that I was a liar. I love hate comments, they fuel my fire, and I really, really appreciate you, man. Like, nothing like being called out for just simply playing 17 matches with the deck and telling you what my record is. It's really great to hear that. And to the guy that went 8-2 with the deck in the last deck tech, thank you. Thank you for playing my deck. Thank you for trusting me. And it's a big win for you, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. With that being said, let's get into this. So today, we're going to be talking about blue-white control. For those who have been listening to constructive criticism for a long time, have been about part of the podcast, you got to watch a really special journey a few years back of myself and my co-host at the time, Quentinn Pierce, qualifying for our first Pro Tours, and Quentinn qualifying for his second Pro Tour, and the people that I got to work with in Matt and Michael and Casey and all of our journeys through that part of our lives in Magic, grinding PTQs, some of those guys playing a ton of Grand Prix, getting silver, and us just trying to improve at this game. And Quentinn Pierce, who was my co-host, probably the third longest, I would guess. He is getting back into Magic and wanted me to get back into Magic with him, and it's actually part of the catalyst for me doing these videos again. It's because I'm playing Magic again. And one of the things that happened is right when he got into the game again, the bannings happened. And so he had been building blue-white control, and this is a deck that he and I have been working on a little bit together. And I kind of want to go over it and talk about the deck, talk about its matchups, talk about the sideboard a little bit. But we had some stuff based off of some things that were doing well, before the bannings, and then some changes. And then we actually went back to PV's Worlds list and made some changes based upon that deck list. And so this is kind of where I'm at right now. I think this is one or two cards off from Quentinn's list. But this is the 75, so we'll go over it really quick. We have 3 Birth of Meletis, 3 Essence Scatter, 4 Omen of the Sea, 1's Dovin's Veto, 1 Thassa's Intervention, 2 Banishing Light, 3 Thirst for Meaning, 3 Narset Parter of Veils, 2 Neutralize, 1 Absorb, 1 Archon of Sun's Grace, 4 Shatter the Sky, 1 Teferi Master of Time, 3 Elspeth Conquers Death, 1 Dream Trawler, and 2 Shark Typhoon. The lands we have are 1 Castle Ardenvale, 3 Plains, 1 Castle Vantress, 6 Islands, 4 Hollowed Fountain, 4 Temple of Enlightenment, 2 Rugrin. You know what's funny is in my last video I told you guys to tell me how to say this, and somebody texted me how to say Triome, but I still don't know how to say some of these words at the beginning. But we have the Jeskai Triome, and we have 2 Fable Passage and 2 Field of Ruin in the main deck. The lands are the mana base is actually pretty good. It's a 2-color mana base with we have 12 dual lands, 2 spell lands in addition to the cycling lands, plus the LD spell lands in the form of Field of Ruin. The only time that I was ever having mana trouble with this deck specifically is when I was playing 4 Absorb when I went up to 2 Field of Ruin. That was basically it. That was the only time I really had any mana trouble, and it actually was the catalyst for me wanting to play Neutralize instead of Absorb. The other thing is that this deck already gains quite a bit of life between Archon of Sun's Grace, Dream Trawler, Birth of Meletis. There's already quite a bit of life gain going on in this deck, and so the Absorbs didn't really feel necessary to me. But if you do want to play more Absorbs, if you think that the metagame is more about Absorb than this cancel right now, I think that cutting down on a Field of the Ruin and playing either another Castle Vantress or another Castle Ardenvale is totally reasonable. The deck has I think this deck only has 25 lands in the main. We'll pull that up really quick. Part of the reason for that is the Birth of Meletis and the number of draw spells that the deck plays. So, you may be used to playing a control deck with maybe something along the lines of 26 or 27 lands, and this deck is certainly lower on the land count. But with that being said, Shark Typhoon cycles itself are pretty cheap. Thirst for Meaning gets you through quite a bit of cards. You have cycling in your neutralize. Your Omen of the Seas can dig you for lands, and then of course Birth of Meletus typically will just go and grab you that plains, and it's also the reason that you see only 3 plains in the main deck. The way this deck typically wins is just with its flyers. It's typical that you'll either get down an early Sun's Grace or a later Sun's Grace with a couple of Birth of Meletus and Own of the Sea to get some other flyers down. Dream Trawler is easily the most common thing that you'll win with, at least in the main board games. But it's not uncommon for you to get down, actually cast Shark Typhoon. I've probably won more casting Shark Typhoon and then casting spells than I have just cycling to make a giant shark. You just play so many non-creatures in this deck that it's just really easy for a Shark Typhoon to get out of hand. Dream Trawler's ability to protect itself is obviously really good. I have never won a game with Castle Ardenvale tokens. It almost makes me wonder if I should cut it, but the number of times where I get a block an X1 and it's pretty good is high enough that I've kept it in the deck. And then the ultimate of Teferi, the take 2 additional turns, it's really hard not to win the game once you've done that. But it's obviously only one of in the deck and pretty rare. But overall, those are typically the ways that you're going to win. This deck is definitely more of a draw-go style deck for the most part. Obviously, you have things like Elspeth Conquers Death and Shark Typhoon as these expensive things that make that not the case. But typically, the way that you're going to draw a bunch of cards with Thirst for Meaning, Thassa's Intervention, Narset means that you're not going to tap out all of your mana most of the time, and your counter spells will kind of pave the way for you to resolve something big and things like that. Shadow of the Sky obviously makes it be less of a draw-go deck as well, but it's a pretty typical, blue-white control deck overall. I think the coolest interaction in this deck is definitely being able to get back your Narsets with your Elspeth Conquers Death, because Narset dies so easily that finding your Elspeth Conquers Death with your Narset and then getting it back is just a good time. Like I used to make a joke on Constructor Criticism all the time that Narset Conquers Death is basically dig through time, and that's not really true. It's not quite that good, but when it is dig through time, it's pretty powerful. One of the things that was really important to Quentinn as we were testing is kind of how good we feel like Essence Scatter was going to be in this format right now. It's this cheap spell that interacts with creatures, and the format outside of, I think, Nissa and Ugin is pretty creature-centric. And so for me, I just needed the appropriate number of counter spells that could counter Ugin specifically. And so for me, we have Dovin's Veto, Naturalize, and Absorb. And because we don't have a lot of things that Ugin can come down and we don't really care about him destroying them, other than Banishing Light, Elspeth Conquers Death can often you can just let it resolve what's going to do. It'll do you 3 and then die. So, the deck doesn't have as big of a problem with big planeswalkers as you might think that it would. And you have the appropriate number of counter spells to kind of deal with a diversity of threat from your opponents, that I would say. One of the other things that I would say, things can change depending on how you want to build this deck. I know the version for a while had 2 Archons of Sun's Grace in the main. Right now there's 2 in the board, 1 in the main. And I think that could really change depending on how you want to build the deck. Like, I think there's a world in which you could just play the 3rd Shadow of the Sky in the sideboard, and play 2 Archons main. And you kind of have this nice enchantment package. You're playing 2 Shark Typhoon, you're playing 3 Elspeth Conquers Death, you're playing Banishing Lights, Birth of Meletus, Omen of the Sea. You're playing quite a few enchantments to kind of just get those triggers off, as well as just really making it easy for your Thirst for Meanings to make you only discard 1 card depending on the context of the game. It's definitely okay sometimes to be discarding your Omen of the Seas, your Birth of Meletus, to that Thirst for Meaning. And then Thirst for Meaning also being able to draw you 3 cards when you have a Dream Trawler in play really lets you close games out, or just take out planeswalkers with quite a bit of loyalty on them. In the sideboard, we have 2 Sky Tether, 3 Ether Gust, 2 Cerulean Drake, 2 Dovin's Veto, 3 Mystical Dispute, 2 Archon Sun's Grace, and 1 Dream Trawler. So the sideboard is made up of interaction and uh, basically threats. There was a time where I had double Baneslayer Angel in here. Quentinn said he didn't like it, and I played one game with them, and I think that they're probably worse a lot of the time than Archon of Sun's Grace or Dreamtrawler in this deck. Sky Tether was a change that we made when we realized that it was an enchantment instead of something like Glass Casket, and we were trying to figure out times where you wouldn't rather just have Sky Tether. And Sky Tether being a 1 mana enchantment that interacts with your Archon of Sun's Grace is actually really cool, especially when you're boarding up Archons of Sun's Grace. It just means that you have cheap ways to quickly get the token off and also interact with your opponent, which is really nice. Cerulean Drake is a card that I think that mono red is actually quite good right now. And I wanted something that really helped me in that matchup specifically. So that's definitely one that was an inclusion that I've been pretty happy with. And then the Counterspell Suite kind of just, I think this can change depending on what spells you expect to play against. Between Dovin's Veto, Ether Gust, and Mystical Dispute, it can be adjusted according to kind of what decks you're playing against. I've played against Mono Blue with this deck. I've played against Sultai Ramp with this deck. I've played against, Blue Green Ramp with this deck. I've played against Winota decks with this deck. I mean, I've played against the Gambit with this deck. And one of the things that Quentinn was saying that he really likes about this deck is the deck just has a variety of answers and just has game against everything. Your game plan doesn't change. You get to be doing the same thing every game, regardless of what you're playing against, and then you're just tuning your deck to beat those other decks in a really easy way to play a control deck. And honestly, I say this all the time, I've always thought that control, especially blue-white control, is one of the easier decks to play in Magic, and it comes across to a lot of people as these really hard decks to play, but for me, the thing that it comes down to is it breaks down the game of Magic into yes or no questions. Can I beat this right now? Can I use my life total as a resource? Can I use the Shadow of the Sky in the 2 turns? What does the clock look like? And it breaks it down into pretty easy to solve decisions, in my opinion. And this deck is no different. It reminds me a lot of some of the Teferi decks of the past. If you played a lot with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Elspeth Conquers Death is just a really powerful card that lets you have answers to a lot of hard to deal with permanents in this deck, while gaining you pretty big advantages. Sky Tether and Ether Gust and Cerulean Drake are really good against the mono red decks together. We can bring in Archons of Sungrace in that. Dream Trawler is a really hard to deal with answer. The only thing that I would say is, like, if other blue-white decks become really popular, you probably do have to change the context of your deck to have some other types of hard to deal with answers and control mirrors. I don't know that once everybody else is playing Dovin's Veto and Mystical Dispute, in addition to you doing it, it changes the context of how you have to win the game. Right now, that's not a problem, but it's certainly something to look out for. Overall, I think this deck is powerful. It has game against a lot of different decks, and if you're looking for a control deck to play, I know that other people have been touting blue-black control, and some people even really like Grixis control. For me, this is definitely the control deck that I would be playing if I'm in the mood for a control deck. I think Shadow of the Sky is really powerful right now against the Elementals decks, against some of the creature decks that you run into, and this deck just is able to slow the game down enough that you're going to draw one of your threats and take over the game relatively quickly, because Shark Typhoon, Dream Trawler, and Archon of Sun's Grace all snowball into you winning the game. So that's going to be it this week for this deck tech. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you want to tell me how I'm a liar and I can't win 15 matches with the deck, do that too. I'll flash my state championship trophies at you, and we'll just move on. Thank you everybody so much for watching, and we'll see you all next week on another deck tech here on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel.